Greetings. This is the voice of Daniel speaking to you. I come again with another teaching whose time has come. In this teaching, I will speak on the importance of choice and consequence as the fundamental principles of the divine plan for the creation experiment, and why these principles govern the experiential outcomes for intelligent beings who are playing out various roles that facilitate their mental and spiritual development. Let us go back, way back, to the creation story of man that is written in the Bible. In the story, we are told that Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden were told by the Creator that they could eat of any tree in the garden, but that there were two trees in particular that, if they were to eat from these trees, one would grant them eternal life, and the other would cause their physical suffering and death. Such was the directive that was to determine their experiences in the garden. Many have interpreted this directive from the Creator as a command that would test their obedience or disobedience to the Creator. But what is generally not considered by many is that the directive was also a choice that was given to them. For within this directive was the choice to obey or disobey the directive of the Creator, and to experience the consequence of their choice, even if this was not readily obvious to them. Also, another point that many who interpret this story remains unaware of is that for a choice to exist, there must be two opposing options from which to choose, thus establishing the prime fundamental principle of the creation experiment, that of duality. As the directive states, the choice was between eating from the tree of life or eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the consequence of which would determine the experiential outcome for them and all of man and mankind. Now then, keep in mind the fact that for a choice to exist, there must be two options between which to choose. This would necessitate the appearance of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, who, as the story goes, coerced Eve into eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, as you will see, there were two choices made by Eve in the garden. The first choice was to choose to acquiesce to the coercion of the serpent, and the second was the choice to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Have you ever wondered where the serpent in the garden came from, and who created the serpent? The serpent that is spoken of in the story was part of a group of beings who were part of an earlier version of the creation experiment who had, over time, achieved a high level of intelligence, skill, and mental enlightenment among them. And, like all souls within the creation, they too were given a soul contract to play out certain roles within the creation experiment to facilitate the evolution of man and mankind. And, just like in a movie, they were tasked with playing the villains, working with the negative polarity of the love energy, which acts as a counterbalance to the Creator's use of the positive polarity of the love energy. The consequences of either choice was set up to provide a series of experiences that would further their mental and spiritual evolution based on the lessons learned over the duration of the consequences playing out. Neither choice was considered good or bad in the eyes of the intelligent Creator. It was simply a choice that was given, a choice to be made, and the consequence of the choice made from which to learn. There are those who have interpreted the choices given as being between good or evil, life or death, favorable or unfavorable, based on a limited understanding of the spiritual purpose and intent of the Creator's directive, due to our ego mind's judgment of the options given and the consequences that followed, but only in hindsight. The primary objective of a choice is for souls to explore the extreme polarities of Creator's love energy, its essence, A good example that best illustrates this concept is to think of Creator's love energy as a linear spectrum from left to right. The left side of the love energy spectrum is the positive love energy that facilitates varying degrees of creative and compassionate experiences and outcomes for those who work in service to others. Whereas, at the right side of the love energy spectrum is the distorted negative aspect of the love energy, fear, that facilitate varying degrees of destructive, selfish experiences and outcomes for those who work in service to the self at the expense of others. At the center of this linear spectrum of Creator's love energy is the principle that I call the zero-point path between the two extreme polarities of the spectrum. This is also known as the path of enlightenment or the path of balance. This is analogous to the expression of there being a thin line between love, compassion, and fear, hate. There's more to this concept, which I will address more properly in a future teaching. Now then, at either extreme end of the love energy spectrum, the energy becomes distorted due to an imbalance in the energetic polarity. That is, the energy of being too positively polarized or being too negatively polarized in the love energy. As it is often said, too much of anything is never a good thing. For example, those operating from the extreme left polarity of the love spectrum in service to others creates a distortion in that souls working at this energetic polarity may tend to work in service of others at the detriment of themselves, or become vulnerable to exploitation by those operating at the extreme right of the spectrum of the distorted love polarity, fear, who work mostly in favor of the self. In other words, at either extreme of the love energy spectrum, right or left, all actions become distorted and unfavorable to the individual. This is an important concept to grasp, for herein is the key to understanding why choice is the fundamental principle of the duality experiment for higher level souls who are self-aware and are able to make choices. The choices you make in every moment determines your movement along the polarity spectrum of the love energy, either towards the positive or negative sides of the spectrum. When a choice made by a soul who is polarized on the positive or negative side of the energy spectrum incurs a karmic debt, that soul's polarity moves towards the extreme right or left of the polarity spectrum as they move out of balance and become more distorted. Also, as each soul evolves mentally and spiritually, making choices that are for the highest good of all and incur dharmic blessings, they move closer towards the zero-point path of enlightenment mentioned earlier. This is the midpoint between love and fear on the polarity spectrum, where a person is able to see all experiences from a higher spiritual perspective and make choices that are for the highest good of all. As souls who polarize on the positive side of the love spectrum evolve, they become less distorted and more balanced as they move towards the zero-point path of the spectrum. Similarly, as souls who polarize on the negative or fear side of the love spectrum evolve, they too become less distorted and more balanced as they too move towards the zero-point path of the spectrum. It is important to note here that there is no judgment of souls experiencing on either side of the love energy spectrum, as that is only the consequence of a choice that is playing out for them. And, over time, they too will evolve via their positive or negative experiencing towards the path of enlightenment. As stated in my previous teaching, all experiential paths lead to the same destination and outcome, your mental and spiritual enlightenment and walking the zero-point path. So, as you can see, choices allow souls to learn and evolve so they can, over many lifetimes, move towards the zero-point path of enlightenment where they graduate to higher levels of experiencing and have life purposes of greater importance for the collective. In every moment, a choice is made between love and fear, and depending on where you polarize on the love spectrum, your experiences will be an outplay of the consequence of that choice. Some examples of making a choice in each moment include, but are not limited to, your choice to get out of bed or not, your choice to go to work or not, your choice to eat or not, and your choice to feel happy or sad based on whether your expectations and desires manifested as intended or not. No matter what choice you make, the consequence of that choice will play out for you as experiences that you may judge to be favorable or unfavorable in your life, and from those experiences many lessons will be learned in hindsight or via deep contemplation. So, as you can see, the duality experience would not be possible without choice and consequence, as it is through these processes that the various polarities of the love energy are expressed within the creation experiment, that is, the choosing between love and fear in each moment. Fear is the extreme negative distortion of the love energy polarity, the farthest right on the love spectrum mentioned earlier, which is based on the intentions and actions that benefit the self at the detriment of others. Not all choices and actions by people who are negatively polarized is negative, or of service to self only, as one would believe. For example, even the most selfish or evil person among us still possess love and compassion for their families, their spouses, and children, similar to those who work with the extreme positive polarity of love at the extreme left of the spectrum. Going back to the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, when a choice was made by Eve and Adam to eat of the tree which gave them knowledge of good and evil, they became locked into cycles of experiential learning as the consequence of their choice played out around them, even generationally. It is wise to remove pre-existent judgment about whether the choice they made was in disobedience to the Creator, or whether the unfavorable consequences of their choice was a form of divine punishment, as this would be a distorted judgment based in ego and separation consciousness. Consider for a moment that both trees in the garden was created by the Creator for a purpose, and that the purpose was to provide options for a choice to be possible from which to choose. This was not a test of loyalty or obedience to the Creator, as many would like you to believe. It was simply an experiment in choice and consequence that was set up to provide experiential learning so that souls could evolve mentally and spiritually. Only through experiencing does one truly gain the value of a lesson. There is a difference in knowing of a choice and experiencing the consequences of that choice. There are those who may ask themselves, well, what about having to choose between multiple options? Does this then not disprove the idea of choice being between love and fear? To this, I would simply say, in every situation, there can be only one choice for the individual, as one cannot choose love and fear simultaneously. Let's explore this concept in terms of rightness and wrongness for ease of understanding. In situations where there appear to be multiple options from which to choose, which is an illusion of choice, there can be only one most right choice and one most wrong choice. All other options may be measured in terms of degree of rightness and wrongness compared to the most right and the most wrong options. This is similar to the conceptual example of the linear love spectrum mentioned earlier. All options are simply degrees of rightness or wrongness when compared to the most right and most wrong options along a spectrum. Here too you see duality at play, because even with the illusion of having multiple options, there are only two sets of options from which to choose. those that are of degrees of rightness compared to the most right option, and those that are of degrees of wrongness compared to the most wrong option. So, as you can see, there are only two options in every moment, and only one choice that can be made. There are no exceptions to this duality of choice. Going back to the story of Adam and Eve, the consequence of the choice that led to their expulsion from the garden, as the story goes, has been seen by many as a form of divine punishment from the Creator for their disobedience, but this view is not from a spiritual perspective of the divine plan for the creation experiment. The harshness of the consequence of their choice to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil was, from a spiritual perspective then, set up to teach them lessons about the polarities of good and evil as part of their experiencing in duality consciousness. Consider for a moment if Adam and Eve had chosen only to eat from the tree of eternal life, as the story goes, and lived in a state of eternal bliss, never having experiences of good and evil, or death, or challenges to overcome and to learn from. How then would they have evolved mentally and spiritually without choice? And how would they know the difference between life and death of the body? Think on this for a moment. Without choice, there would be no duality in the creation experiment, and the evolution of souls would happen very, very slowly as a distorted experiment without an awareness of choice or experiential learning. Choice sets up the dynamic of balance and counterbalance in every situation. Choice and consequence are the true measure of reality, not time, as is believed by many, because time is an illusion. Choice and consequence are the processes by which inspired thoughts and intentions are validated via experiential outcomes from which we learn. And, while the consequences of each choice will be different for every individual, the lessons learned are what become the personal truths for every individual. There's no denying this. What you experience is what you know to be true for yourself without question. So, as was stated in a previous teaching, choice and consequence are what create and validate our reality, not our thoughts as is believed by many, because thoughts are unmanifested ideas that exist only in the mind and are fleeting and unstable. And, until a choice is made and acted upon, there will be no physical or material change in our lives. There is a huge difference between having an inspired thought and living the experience of that thought in the physical. Just like a scriptwriter who writes a movie, the script itself is just an unmanifested idea that lives only in the mind of the writer, and only when it is acted out by actors who play out different roles as directed does it become experienced and validated, although virtually. I hope this teaching brings clarity and enlightenment to those of you who resonate with the wisdom shared here. I honor you. Please take a moment to contemplate on the wisdom shared here. Please like and subscribe to this channel for future teachings. I leave you now with the grace of the infinite Creator who is my judge. Please be loving and kind to each other.